Welcome to my story channel. I'm Shamrock. After 10 years of marriage, my husband brought home a young girl, claiming she was a relative's child staying temporarily. However, their daily interactions felt like those of a couple. Deep down, I understood that this was not just a child staying with us, but rather his lover. Reflecting on the past 10 years, my heart has become indifferent. Rather than continuing in this tangled situation, I might as well let him pursue his happiness. Now the story officially begins. You and your family are happy and content, and I will also bloom beautifully on my own. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, I called David Smith 10 times in a row, but no one answered. Even though the incision was still painful, I heard that the supermarket was having a sale, and after some hesitation, I went to buy some inexpensive groceries, and then I took a taxi home. Today is our 10th wedding anniversary, so I didn't follow the doctor's advice and left the hospital early. As soon as I stepped inside the house, I heard laughter coming from within. I stood at the doorway for quite a while, and the two people on the sofa didn't notice me at all. David Smith looked much younger when he was with that girl, completely different from the way he always sighed when he was with me. It had been a long time since he had shown such an expression. In the past, he would often hold me like this, gently nuzzle my nose, and affectionately call me little girl. Now the living room was filled with all sorts of packages, and an unfamiliar suitcase was open, spilling out delicate women's lingerie. The vegetables in my hand fell to the ground, and the last trace of my attachment to marriage completely vanished. I walked over with a blank expression and turned off the television that was playing a romantic movie. David Smith didn't explain anything. Instead, he frowned at me, looking quite displeased. "Grace Johnson, what are you doing?" I leisurely leaned against the other side of the sofa, holding a fruit bowl filled with rinsed strawberries. "It's too noisy." I lowered my head and started scrolling through short videos, completely ignoring David Smith's sullen expression and the awkwardness of the strange girl. I am someone who enjoys peace and quiet. In the past, whenever I took a break, he would proactively turn his phone to silent and lower his voice, afraid of disturbing me. Even when I was on my phone, he would try to keep quiet while working, always prioritizing my feelings. Yet now, he has moved another woman into the house and is asking me why I feel this way. Possibly sensing my indifference, he patiently sat beside me, but his tone was not friendly. "Sophie Miller is just a relative's child, staying here for a few days. Are you really getting jealous?" I looked at him in confusion, finding his clumsy lie quite ridiculous. Sophie Miller approached, biting her lip, and looked at me with a pleading expression, apologizing sweetly. "Aunt, I'm really just here to stay temporarily. Please don't be angry with Uncle. It's all my fault, I shouldn't have come. I can leave and not stay here at all." Her eyes turned red. Tears streamed down her face as if she felt wronged, and as she spoke, she seemed close to fainting. David Smith held Sophie Miller tightly, a look of disgust filling his eyes when he turned to me. "I can't believe you're so spiteful. Look at yourself. You're in your 40s and still jealous of young girls. Don't you feel ashamed?" He gently stroked Sophie Miller's delicate arm, his gaze filled with contempt, as if he wished to tear me apart. I couldn't help but touch my own skin, now loose from the passage of time. Many years ago, I noticed the first fine lines at the corners of my eyes, and I felt a deep sadness, crying in his embrace. He said to me, "Honey, no matter how you change, I will always love you. I only love you." But later, it seemed he didn't want to look at me any longer. He hurriedly grabbed Sophie Miller and ran out, as if she had suddenly fallen gravely ill and could die at any moment. The door slammed shut with a loud bang, and I felt a tremor through my body, sharp pain radiating from my abdominal wound, and cold sweat pouring down my forehead. I had suffered multiple miscarriages for him, but the pain of this uterine fibroid removal was far worse than before. During my first miscarriage, when our careers were not yet as successful, he held me tightly and cried, saying that the arrival of a child was not the right time. Even though I knew my body was weak, I still made the painful decision to terminate the pregnancy. During the short recovery period, he carefully prepared various delicacies for me, never neglecting me despite his busy work. He treated me like a child, cradling me at night and telling me bedtime stories. David Smith knew that I had difficulty conceiving after multiple miscarriages, But at that time he didn't look down on me. Instead, he felt sympathetic and gently said to me, "Having a baby is too painful, I don't want you to suffer." However, later on, he looked at me with disdain, calling me a woman who couldn't have children. I once saw the way he loved me, so now that he doesn't love me anymore, I can tell. Looking at the bandage stained with blood at the edge of the wound, I suddenly remembered that I hadn't bought any new bandages since I returned from the hospital. I was slowly walking home with a bag of medical gauze and anti-inflammatory medicine, when I ran into David Smith walking with Sophie Miller. They were beaming with smiles, looking like a happy couple. But when we crossed paths, their smiles vanished in an instant, replaced by cold, gloomy expressions. "Sophie fainted because of you. Not only did you not apologize at home by cooking, but you also came out to follow us. Do you have a problem? Why don't you go to the hospital and check your brain?" After saying this, he noticed the bag I was holding, grabbed it from me, and started rummaging through it, scoffing derisively. "Sophie just fainted and you went to buy medicine. You really make me sick with how you imitate others. Are you done?" The pain from my wounds prevented me from saying another word. I just wanted him to stop talking. He seemed surprised that I remained so calm, unhappily tossing the bag at me before pulling Sophie Miller into a taxi by the roadside and driving away, leaving me standing alone. He suspected that I was following him, which wasn't surprising, as I had always insisted he keep me updated on his whereabouts and even text me his hotel room number when he was on business trips. If he didn't reply to my messages promptly, I would bombard him with calls. I couldn't help but smile bitterly. Despite my tight surveillance, he still cheated on me right under my nose. When I got home, I had just swallowed my medication, gritting my teeth as I changed the old bandage, and then I opened the door to the master bedroom, only to find Sophie Miller lying in bed. "What are you doing in my room?" Sophie Miller pretended to look wronged as she ran barefoot off the bed, tightly grasping my hand and earnestly saying, "Aunt, I haven't been feeling well. The doctor said I need to get more sunshine, and this room gets plenty of sunlight. Please let me stay here." I forcefully shook off her hand, frowning and replying unhappily, "Do you need to get sunlight at night too?" Suddenly, she collapsed to the floor with a heavy thud, gasping and her eyes turning red as she looked toward the door, clutching my skirt. "Please don't blame my uncle, it's all my fault. I insisted on staying here." David Smith grabbed my shoulder from behind and pulled me away, making me wince in pain as I gasped. He hurriedly helped Sophie Miller up from the ground, making sure she felt comfortable in the room, and carefully tucked her in with a blanket. "Do you only think about your own pain? Have you ever considered that when you push Sophie she would also be hurt? That's just awful." It was truly surprising that David Smith could be tricked by such an obvious trap. When he loved me, he would get anxious and hold me comfortingly whenever I frowned slightly. Now that he doesn't love me anymore, everything I say or do seems to be wrong. I was not interested in their childish games, so I turned and went to the spare bedroom. While I was tidying up the blanket and preparing to go to the guest room, I ran into David Smith coming out of the master bedroom. His clothes were wrinkled, and there was a damp mark on his chest. He looked at my arms holding the blanket with some impatience and said, "What are you making a fuss about? I'm pretty sure I already told you that she is just a child from my relative's family, didn't I? Do you still want to sleep apart from me? You're over 40 now, you don't have the luxury to be willful anymore. Now that you're older, do you really think I want to be close to you? Don't expect me to sleep with you tomorrow." In the past, I used to like him and often held him while we slept. Sometimes he goes out for social events and comes home late, and I wait for him to return so we can sleep together, despite feeling tired. However, he thinks I rely on him too much, and later even prepared 2 sets of blankets to keep me from sleeping with him. I didn't want to pay him any attention, and as I turned around to leave, I habitually turned off the air conditioning, only to hear David Smith mockingly say, "Ha, you really are getting old. Even with so much money, you're still so thrifty." My heart tightened suddenly. This wasn't the first time he had made a remark about my age. What should be a natural process of aging seems to be unwelcome in this home. I originally thought that my physiological habits would keep me awake, but in reality, I slept very soundly that night. It turned out that my body was no longer in love with him. The next day, I hired a reliable divorce lawyer to help me draft the divorce agreement. Since the company was co-founded by David Smith and me, we need to handle the division of assets carefully. Sophie Miller appeared very confident in front of me every day, as if she was full of certainty about becoming Mrs. Zhao. I know she is neither the first woman David Smith has cheated with nor will she be the last. In the past, I was willing to be his supporter, considering all the collaborations we secured as his achievements. No matter how busy or exhausted I was, I would always cook for him when I got home. Over time, I even began to feel truly incapable. David Smith called and told me in a commanding tone, "You must remember to attend the celebration dinner at 7 tonight." I put on a dress from years ago and realized it no longer fit. The fabric at the waist was tightly constricting me, and the once vibrant color no longer suited me. I was silent for a while, and ultimately decided to cut this precious piece of clothing into tatters with scissors. The clothes from years ago no longer fit, and the people around me have also changed since then. I casually put on a set of casual clothes, applied nothing to my face, and arrived at the venue just like that. David Smith was not present, and after asking his assistant, I found out that he had gone to pick up Sophie Miller. Soon after, Sophie Miller arrived, looking stunning in a beautiful gown, accompanied by David Smith. Upon seeing me without makeup, David Smith's expression immediately turned displeased. "You came here without putting on any makeup or dressing up. It's really embarrassing for me," he remarked. Sophie Miller covered her mouth and laughed, responding, "Oh, come on, don't say that. At her age, even if she puts on makeup, it wouldn't look good. It's better not to wear any at all." The people at the scene were taken aback by her words, especially Linda Brown, the president of Prime Group, who had just signed the contract with us, as her brows furrowed. Linda Brown is also a woman around my age, and has been trying to recruit me to her company for many years. However, I have always declined due to David Smith. In this collaboration, Linda Brown agreed to it partly because of our relationship. To protect David Smith's pride, I didn't tell him this. He still believes that he was the one who facilitated it. When Linda Brown heard this, she seemed a bit unhappy and kept holding my hand, urging me to sit beside her. When it was time to order, David Smith handed the menu to Sophie Miller. She looked at me and, smiling, ordered a lot of spicy dishes. I furrowed my brow and said, "I can't eat spicy food." David Smith looked very angry, his face darkening. "Don't you usually eat a lot of it? Why can't you handle it today? Are you trying to cause trouble on purpose?" Sophie Miller, with a resentful expression on her face, looked at David Smith innocently, her voice tinged with sorrow. "Aunt, don't you usually love spicy food the most? Why can't we eat today? Is it because you hate me?" In the end, David Smith completely disregarded everyone else's preferences to oppose me, allowing Sophie Miller to order a lot of spicy dishes. Sophie Miller pretended to care as she served me the food, but it was so spicy that the heat made my nose tingle. I furrowed my brows as I dumped the food aside, unable to hold back any longer, and said, "I've already told you I can't eat spicy food." I pushed aside Sophie Miller's hand as she tried to continue serving me, resulting in the chopsticks and food falling. Immediately, her white dress was marred with oil stains. The sound of chopsticks falling to the floor suddenly filled the private room with a heavy silence. David Smith abruptly stood up and forcefully overturned the utensils in front of me, which clattered loudly to the ground. He said, "Don't be so ungrateful. Sophie Miller wants to reconcile with you. How can you refuse her like this?" Sophie Miller feigned a look of grievance, which made me feel very uncomfortable. Build a good relationship? Can you really not understand? David Smith, infuriated by me, grabbed my chin and forced my mouth open, making me tilt my head back. Then they deliberately stuffed a chili pepper into my mouth, compelling me to swallow it. The heat of the pepper immediately spread throughout my mouth, making me feel short of breath and causing an unnatural flush on my face. I am allergic to chili peppers and have never eaten them. Now I feel as though my entire body is on fire, as if ants are gnawing at me from within. Do you think just because you're a shareholder in the company you can do whatever you want? Let me tell you, without me you are nothing. Apologize to Sophie Miller right now. Everyone thought I would explode in anger, and even the usually calm Linda Brown held my hand nervously. But I just endured the pain, taking advantage of my clarity to pull out the divorce agreement I had prepared long ago from my bag. "Let's get a divorce." David Smith was momentarily stunned. as if he didn't understand what I was saying. I forced a smile, even though I felt the wound in my abdomen open up and bleed, and pressed on through the pain. If you don't sign it, I will submit the evidence of your infidelity to the court. I have everything. David Smith did not expect that I had secretly gathered evidence. He grabbed my collar and shook me forcefully like a wild animal out of control. I felt a wave of dizziness and then lost my balance, falling to the ground. David Smith had developed many red rashes all over his body due to an allergy, which looked quite frightening. Everyone was scared by the situation, too afraid to speak, just standing there frozen. David Smith remembered that earlier I had pretended to faint to elicit his sympathy, and had threatened to commit suicide. Now he was worried that I was just acting again, so he yelled at my frail body like a madman. You still dare to act now? You're just playing mind games again, aren't you? I won't fall for your tricks. Aren't you looking to get a divorce? Fine, I'll grant you that right now. After saying this, he didn't even bother to look at the contents of the divorce agreement. He simply took a pen from my bag and signed his name. Linda Brown could no longer hold back. She pulled him away forcefully, nearly causing him to fall, while helping me up and scolding him at the same time. Do you even have any shame left? In order to take action against Grace Johnson for that woman. You don't deserve to have Grace Johnson at all. You might as well close your company soon. David Smith sat on the ground in silence, facing Linda Brown's accusations, quietly watching her take me to the hospital. Sophie Miller wasn't familiar with anyone at the table today, and feeling dissatisfied with Linda Brown's words, she rushed over and pushed Linda Brown. However, Linda Brown was not David Smith. She would not be lenient towards Sophie Miller. Linda Brown slapped Sophie Miller hard, causing Sophie Miller's face to swell immediately. With tears in her eyes, Sophie Miller looked at David Smith, hoping for some comfort. However, David Smith was very angry and scolded her loudly. Do you have any idea who that person is? If she's angry, our whole company will pay the price. Suddenly faced with this accusation, Sophie Miller was too frightened to move. She stopped crying and could only follow David Smith to the hospital to apologize to Linda Brown. David Smith and Sophie Miller stood outside the operating room, hesitant to speak loudly. They quietly apologized to Linda Brown, but her expression remained grim. When the doctor wheeled me out of the operating room, my face was still a bit flushed, but the rash had diminished significantly. Seeing this, Linda Brown finally felt a sense of relief. The doctor, looking serious, addressed the people in front of him, saying the patient is allergic to peppers, and just underwent surgery for a uterine fibroid. How could anyone let her eat peppers? This is not a joke about her life. David Smith saw that I was fine, and then turned to Linda Brown with a smile on his face. Linda Brown, I apologize for causing you to witness this today. It's my failure to manage my household matters properly. You shouldn't take her too seriously. Although she is a shareholder, her abilities are quite average, he added. Upon hearing this, Linda Brown, who had just relaxed after confirming my well-being, became tense again. Unable to tolerate her partner's shamelessness, she gave David Smith a hard slap. David Smith's facial muscles twitched slightly. Although he felt dissatisfied inside after being slapped by a woman, for the sake of their collaboration, he managed to suppress his annoyance and still smiling said, Linda Brown, you have every right to be angry. I was too impulsive today. I will handle these matters at home more appropriately in the future. Linda Brown saw that he still seemed unaware of why he was being reprimanded. With a stern expression, she interrupted him, her tone firm and unquestionable. You still don't understand where you went wrong? Do you really think that our partnership was solely due to your efforts? I'll be honest with you, I only gave this opportunity because of Grace Johnson. I was initially unwilling to collaborate with you, but she came to me, even collapsing at a dinner and ending up in the hospital. How can you have the audacity to say she lacks capability? Where were you when she fainted? When you were admitted to the hospital, where were you? You were too busy being intimate with that woman next to you. She didn't let me tell you, all to protect your fragile self-esteem. Seeing David Smith's stunned expression, Linda Brown became even angrier and directly pushed him away, saying, You don't deserve to be with her. Get lost. Our partnership ends here. I want to see how your company continues to develop without Grace Johnson's help. When I opened my eyes again, Linda Brown was no longer by my side, and on the bedside lay the already signed divorce agreement. David Smith, seeing that I was awake, immediately came over with a show of concern, as if he were not the one who had forced me to eat chili and pushed me down earlier. Since you've already signed, why are you still here? I turned my head away from him, but he didn't give up. He gently held my hand and whispered, "Wife, I have my reasons." Hearing that term again took me back to a time a few years ago when our feelings were intense, but now all I felt was disgust. Before he could continue speaking, a wronged voice from outside the door interrupted him. It was Sophie Miller, who was gently leaning against the doorframe, looking hesitant with tears in her eyes. She held a report in her hand and said softly, "Uncle." David Smith, no longer gentle as before, quickly approached her, snatched the report from her hands, and forcefully pushed Sophie Miller out, preventing her from getting closer. However, when he saw the contents of the report, David Smith froze for a moment. Initially intending to crumple it up and throw it away, he ultimately sighed, carefully folded it and put it away. I noticed his panic and couldn't help but laugh. He always acts like he's covering it up well, but actually there are many flaws. David Smith adjusted his expression and came over to help me straighten the blankets. "Honey, I truly only love you. We've been together all these years." I looked him in the eye and calmly said, "She's already pregnant. Can you really bear the thought of your child being called an illegitimate child as soon as they are born? I no longer love you, and the divorce agreement has already been signed. There's nothing more for us to discuss." I sneered internally. This was merely him taking Linda Brown's advice, thinking it wasn't quite the right time to break up, and wanting to put on a melodramatic act of deep marital feelings one more time. "I've already said that if you continue to cling to me, I will consider appealing." He didn't respond, just kept his head down, seemingly lost in deep memories. During my hospital stay, he had taken care of me meticulously. Everything felt like it had returned to a long time ago. His care and affection for me seemed to offer the best of everything. But I knew that no matter what he did, he could never truly heal the pain within me. On the day I was discharged, Linda Brown came to pick me up. As I walked to the door, I saw him accompanying Sophie Miller for her prenatal checkup. Linda Brown, with a mix of complaint and concern, said, "Grace Johnson, how could you tolerate such a person for so long?" Then she handed me a job offer. "You can't refuse this time, right?" The job location that Linda Brown arranged for me is abroad. She hopes I will go with her and see the sights I have missed over the years. When I was in college, I received an opportunity for a government-funded recommendation to study abroad. David Smith said he didn't want to part ways with me, which made it difficult for me to leave. So, I gave up my opportunity to study abroad and chose to start a business with him. Later, he encouraged me to stay at home and let him support me, but at that time, I was worried about the pressure he would face alone and didn't agree to it. Otherwise, I might have ended up with nowhere to go. Sadly, I always considered his feelings, while he was only focused on how to control me. On the way to the airport, Linda Brown seemed to be reminiscing about her college days, sharing some gossip with me while smiling brightly. She mentioned that Sophie Miller had successfully moved up after our divorce. Upon learning that I was awarded 70% of the asset division, Sophie, who is expecting a child, made quite a scene at home, which has led David Smith to avoid going back and instead stay at the office these days. Linda Brown laughed happily, while I felt calm inside because I knew that good things were yet to come. While organizing my belongings, I intentionally kept an old, yellowed report card. This report card indicated that he suffered from oligospermia, due to poor lifestyle habits. It's unclear when they will find out. As soon as I arrived abroad, I received numerous messages from employees requesting that I take them with me. My departure has interrupted several collaborative projects I had facilitated, resulting in inventory piling up at the company's plants, workers losing job opportunities, and the company facing pressure for large-scale layoffs. Sophie Miller seems to still believe that David Smith is wealthy and insists that the quality of life must remain at the highest standard. Otherwise, she threatens to terminate the pregnancy. Under these circumstances, David Smith's life must be quite difficult. I took a deep breath and realized that the employees were innocent, as they also had families to support. However, David Smith couldn't even come up with a single solution and was merely stalling for time. His behavior was truly disappointing and not worthy of respect at all. Seeing those sincere words made me feel even worse, even more heartbroken than when I found out about his affair. Linda Brown. Does our company still need to hire more staff? Linda Brown was packing her luggage when she heard my question. She smiled slightly and nodded in understanding. Our company currently has enough staff, which allows the older employees to have a bit of a breather. Then she took out her phone and adjusted the employees' working hours while keeping their salaries the same. She then laughed and patted my shoulder. Well, you have to generate more profits for me. Hearing this, I suddenly felt that youthful passion surge within me once again, as if there were still many things waiting for me to accomplish. Tears began to flow down my cheeks as I reflected on the meaning of her words. I will definitely work hard to do well. During the few years I spent abroad, my life was very happy. I resumed exercising, running several kilometers every day, and I looked more energetic overall. I learned to invest in myself and no longer lived as frugally as before. My mood became lighter, and my work efficiency improved. In the past, when I looked in the mirror, I always felt that my fatigue exceeded my actual age, but now I feel full of youthful energy, and the painful memories of the past seem very distant. In fact, not long after arriving here, I heard that David Smith found that report, and he became very angry. In the scuffle, Sophie Miller fell, resulting in her losing the baby. The child was indeed his, but how could someone as suspicious and selfish as him ever feel at ease? After the loss, Sophie Miller went into a frenzy at home, eventually becoming just like the very version of herself that she hated the most. David Smith used to love her tenderness and youth, but after this incident, their relationship was completely shattered. When I heard this news, I just smiled. I had long predicted their outcome. No matter how beautiful and gentle a woman may be, she would turn resentful beside David Smith. I heard that after I left, his company's performance has been declining, and is now on the verge of bankruptcy. His unfair treatment of his two wives throughout his life has led him into this predicament, and it is the result he deserves. During my few days back in the country on business, I managed to take a project away from David Smith. This should have been David Smith's chance to turn his fortunes around, but I won't let him succeed. I heard that he hasn't had a proper rest for a long time because of this project, and in the end he still failed. How can I justify the suffering I went through if I don't let him bear this pain? I saw him outside the venue, and after not seeing him for a few years, he looked much older. His hair was almost completely white, his face was full of worry, and he didn't stand as straight as he used to. When he saw me, he looked incredulous and staggered towards me, saying, "Grace Johnson, you. Do you have any idea how much I missed you? I think about you every day. I've already divorced Sophie Miller, and I've realized my mistakes. Please forgive me." I smiled faintly and raised the document in my hand. "You love me this much?" After he read the document carefully, his expression suddenly turned very ugly, and his anger was obvious. He questioned the other person. "Did you steal my project? You pushed my company into a crisis." I smiled, feeling satisfied at the confusion on his face. "It's all about skills, there's no such thing as stealing." He clung to me frantically, the mix of smoke and alcohol making me feel nauseous. "How can you be so heartless?" She left without saying a word. "Do you know how difficult the company has been in these years? That is the result of your hard work. How could you do this? Can you help me one more time and come back? Can you bear to see it being destroyed?" I could hardly breathe and was completely speechless. Sophie Miller suddenly appeared and bit David Smith hard on the shoulder. David, in pain, let go of me, and Sophie immediately got into a scuffle with him. "You hurt my child. You said you only loved me, but you've betrayed me. I will punish you." Sophie Miller was frail and unable to stand up to David Smith. In a fit of rage, David Smith forcefully pushed her to the ground, his eyes filled with fury. "You traitor! You've brought shame upon me." David Smith's fist landed hard on Sophie Miller's face, causing it to swell up immediately, making her original features almost unrecognizable. Sophie Miller's angry accusations turned into cries of pain, but David Smith seemed to have lost all reason, refusing to stop his assault. He had a fierce gaze, full of disgust and hatred. I couldn't stand the bloody scene and quickly took out my phone to call the police. By the time the police arrived, he had not stopped and Sophie Miller was already on the verge of death, unable to make a sound. I felt a wave of fear in my heart. If I continued to get entangled with David Smith, I might also face dire consequences. After finishing my statement, I immediately took the project documents and flew abroad. David Smith was imprisoned for intentionally causing harm. Before he was incarcerated, he requested to see me, saying he had something to tell me, but at that time I was already abroad. Sophie Miller, after being disfigured, spent all her savings on cosmetic surgery. Afterward, she returned to her previous lifestyle, specifically seeking out wealthy individuals and attempting to disrupt their relationships. While I was abroad, I saw a video on social media featuring someone exposing a mistress, and Sophie Miller was in it. In the video, she was grabbed by her hair by the legal wife and was severely slapped, causing her jaw to be dislocated. The two people I disliked most in my first half of life have met such a fate, and I feel a sense of relief while also reflecting on it. Linda Brown saw that I was adapting well to life abroad, so she encouraged me to venture out and start my own business again. I recruited all the original employees, and now the company is doing quite well. David Smith once asked me if I didn't feel heartbroken seeing the company turn out this way. I do feel heartbroken. The company is like my own child. Just as a child who has been wronged by an ex-spouse deserves proper care, I naturally took over and managed it well. David Smith, I believe you would feel comforted to hear this news. Unfortunately, your life has come to an end, but I will continue to move forward and strive for better.